Hello ladies and gentlemen. So last summer we got the final Mission Impossible movie, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, the second part of a two-part story which started with Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, and that was a pretty good movie as far as Mission Impossible movies go. It wasn't the best one by far. My personal favourite is Fallout. But as a Part 1, I thought it was a bloody good Mission Impossible movie, filled with great action, great stunts, and a surprisingly timely storyline about artificial intelligence trying to take over the world. Which is interesting because this story was conceived before the big AI explosion that we have now. But yeah, as a Part 1, it was an excellent film, and I was really looking forward to the second part of the story. Because the great thing about these Mission Impossible movies is that, say what you want about Tom Cruise, but that man earns his money. He's not just the star of the movies, he's the producer, along with his production partner Paula Wagner under Cruise Wagner Productions. But he's very much the creative force, and he does all these crazy stunts himself. Under normal circumstances, a big-time actor would not be allowed to do those kind of stunts that Tom Cruise does on a regular basis for insurance reasons. I mean, how can we forget what happened on Mission Impossible Fallout when he broke his leg doing a pretty crazy stunt? And thankfully he recovered and he was able to do a few more movies. But as good a movie as Dead Reckoning was, it was pretty much a disappointment at the box office. It was released around the same time as Oppenheimer and Barbie, so it kind of got lost in the shuffle there. And while it wasn't a flop exactly, it still made something like nearly 600 million. But given the budget of these movies, I think it's fair to say that it lost some money. And one of the problems with Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, even though it's a good film, is that I think there was studio pressure on Tom Cruise and the filmmakers to make the second part of the story more of a standalone film. I think the impression amongst the studio was that not enough people saw Dead Reckoning Part 1, and if they just jumped right into Dead Reckoning Part 2, people wouldn't be able to follow it. Studio logic. So really, not only did they decide to make the second part of the story more of a standalone film by not calling it Dead Reckoning Part 2, but by just calling it The Final Reckoning, but they'd even gone back to digital copies, and I think physical copies of Dead Reckoning Part 1, and simply retitled it Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, to really sell the movie as more of a standalone story, even though it is in fact the first part of a two-part story here. So yeah, I think the final movie that we got last summer with The Final Reckoning was visually stunning, but there was so much exposition in it, there was so many subplots in it, and it was overall, as far as Mission Impossible movies go, a disappointment. Not a disaster, certainly. I mean, there was still plenty of action, it was still very entertaining, but my impression when I saw it at the cinema last summer was, my God, there was so much stuff in it that they did not need. It was nearly 3 hours long when it didn't need to be. There were these pointless subplots, particularly with the president. More on her in a minute. And I distinctly remember my thoughts on leaving the cinema last summer after seeing the movie was, I really hope someone makes a fan edit of this movie, because there was so much stuff that they could cut out. It's surprising because Tom Cruise is pretty much the creative force of these movies, and he's Tom Cruise, he's the biggest movie star in the world. But I'd say, yeah, there was studio pressure to include all these elements, like a larger role for Angela Bassett, and there were these woke elements that were put in as well. But my initial thoughts were, I really hope someone makes a fan edit of this. And lo and behold, Pentex Productions has made a fan edit of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which they have called Mission Impossible: The Final Editing. Now, I've talked about Pentex Productions in a few of my videos before. They've done some fan edits on some of the Star Wars Disney Plus shows and turned them into movies. Patterson is another YouTuber who has done this, but Pentex Productions made their own fan edit of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the TV series, and he and Patterson, who also made his own fan edit of the Obi-Wan show, they joined forces and made 2 volumes of the Boba Fett show. And it was very, very impressive. Much better than the Disney Plus shows that we got. But anyway, Pentex has made an edit of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. He's taken a near 3-hour movie and made it just over 2 hours. So first, a little bit about the theatrical cut. One of the problems with the theatrical cut was that there was so much exposition in the first half of the movie. And when I say exposition, there was just so much dialogue spoken by the characters to supposedly bring you up to speed on what happened in part one of the story, just for those people who for some reason had never seen part one. So the story of the movie is that the entity that Ethan Hunt and his crew were trying to stop in the last movie has nearly taken over the world. It's taken over the nuclear sites of all the major superpowers around the world, and time is running out. And the theatrical cut, the movie just tries to paint Ethan Hunt as this messiah-like character, that he's the only person who can save us. But there was also this extra subplot with the president. There was so much Angela Bassett as the president, and it was just not needed. There was another subplot that was introduced, but which they never really did anything with, was the fact that there was all this social unrest, that the world was coming apart at the seams because doomsday was coming, because of the entity. And what happens in this cut is that Pentex really streamlines that. His approach to making this cut was that it was part two of a two-part story. This cut basically assumes that you've seen part one, as it should be. Because the thing with a part two is that you should not need so much exposition. When you have part two of a two-part story, you should be pedal to the metal going for a dramatic conclusion. But the theatrical cut wasted so much time with exposition, explaining everything, that it was just not needed. The other thing is the villain, Gabriel, played by Isai Morales. In Dead Reckoning Part 1, they were trying to build him up to be some kind of big ultimate villain for Ethan Hunt, and the fact that there was something personal going on between them in their past, which the movie never really elaborated on. And even in the theatrical cut of Final Reckoning, they really didn't do anything with it. I think I saw some behind the scenes material where the director, Christopher McQuarrie, basically abandoned this storyline because in order to show a flashback of what happened between these two characters in the past, it would have cost more than the submarine sequence in the final movie. And the great thing about the Pentex cut is that it cuts out almost entirely the backstory between Ethan and Gabriel. The result is that Gabriel comes across as just another mustache-twirling villain. At the end of the day, Pentex can only do so much with the material that he has, but I think it's a good choice because the theatrical cut of the movie didn't really do anything with it, and Pentex cuts this out completely. The entity is enough of a threat. Now let's talk about the president, Angela Bassett's character. My God, there was so much screen time given to this woman in the movie, and it was just not needed at all. Now, just to be clear, I like Angela Bassett as an actress, terrific actress, but when I wonder why they gave her so much screen time in this movie, because while Ethan and his team are on their mission to stop the entity, there are several subplots with the president and her son and trying to stop this insurrection, and then there's this whole subplot about her possibly using a nuclear weapon to destroy one of her own cities in order to convince the other superpowers around the world that they can be trusted with controlling all the nuclear arsenals. Because the main plot of this movie is the fact that the entity has infected cyberspace to such an extent that it's taken over all the nuclear arsenals of all the superpowers, Russia, China, the United Kingdom. And in this cut, it really boils it down to a simple threat. There's a clock. In a matter of hours, the entity will have full control of all the nuclear arsenals in the world and can trigger nuclear Armageddon. That's the mission. Ethan has to stop the entity before this happens. But in the theatrical cut of this movie, there was this whole subplot about the president saying, oh, we're going to nuke one of our own cities to prove to Russia that we can be trusted with their nukes, which is completely ridiculous. I know that this movie was filmed before Kamala Harris was even in the running to be the next president, but the result is that President Angela Bassett comes across as a Kamala Harris type character, kind of ridiculous. Again, the great thing about this cut is that Pentex cuts all this out. He keeps the focus on Ethan and his team to stop the entity. And I just have to say something about female presidents in movies, and I know I'm probably going to get murdered for saying this, but whenever I see a female president of the United States in a movie or TV show, it just takes me out of it, because the simple fact is there's never been a female president of the United States. And let's face it, it's not looking likely that there's going to be one in the very near future. Who knows? So in addition to being a shorter cut of the movie, the result is not only does it cut out subplots, it actually does cut out action scenes. And you might think, what's the point in cut out action scenes? But there's this one part of the movie where Ethan is on a submarine getting ready to do his deep dive down to the submarine where the artificial intelligence is stored. And he's attacked by a rogue agent or a sleeper agent on the sub. And this is all intercut with Ethan's team who are somewhere else at this listening post who are getting ready to rescue him when the time comes, where they fight a bunch of Russian soldiers. But I think Pentex makes a very good point in one of the videos he made for this cut, was that he cut out the fight scene with Ethan Hunt and the sleeper agent because the fight scene between Ethan's team and the Russians was enough. It keeps the focus on Ethan's team at that time, doesn't cut away to another action scene, which was kind of distracting, because Ethan goes down in his deep sea dive in the next scene. He's going to be in danger anyway. So there's not much point in having that other fight scene on the submarine. It was just action for action's sake. Now, the two main action highlights of the movie are the plane chase, of course, but then there's the submarine dive. This is a whole sequence that goes on for about 20 minutes, and the theatrical cut, there's a few lines of dialogue by Ethan Hunt supposedly for the dumbos in the audience. There's one part where he's trying to escape the submarine, and he sees the torpedo tubes, and they actually have Tom Cruise ADR a line in saying, "Oh, torpedo tubes," as if we couldn't figure it out ourselves. But that's another nice edit I think Pentex made to that cut. And of course, at the end of that terrific sequence, as unrealistic as it is, Ethan nearly dies. But Ethan's buddy, Luther, who dies earlier in the movie, they include a flashback as Ethan is dying. And it kind of keeps the audience reminded of how he's going to trap the entity by Luther creating this poison pill, so to speak. And when the entity tries to enter this vault where it'll be safe from nuclear Armageddon, they're going to trap it. But that exposition was presented at the start of the movie, and its placement here is where Ethan's literally between life and death. So it makes sense that he would remember this conversation. And the result is that it keeps us, the audience, reminded of how they're actually going to trap the entity. And now another major change to this cut is that they cut out the Briggs subplot. This is another subplot that they introduced in Dead Reckoning, which never really paid off. Well, they tried to pay it off, but it just amounted to nothing. So there's this agent that was trying to catch Ethan in Dead Reckoning Part 1. And again, they tried to play up some personal thing between him and Ethan. And in the theatrical cut, it turns out that he was the son of Jim Phillips from the first movie. Because one criticism of this movie is that, like the James Bond film Spectre, it suffered from trying to tie all the other movies together. Do you remember the James Bond film Spectre, where they tried to take all the events of the Daniel Craig movies and try to tie them all together in Spectre as if it was some grand master plan by the writers? It wasn't. They made it up as they went. And in Final Reckoning, they tried to establish that Ethan's hunt for this rabbit's foot in Mission Impossible 3, which we never really found out what it was actually the source code for the entity. So yeah, thankfully Pentex has cut out this subplot entirely with Briggs, and he's just a guy trying to catch Ethan in this movie. It was a pointless subplot that they just didn't need. And the great thing about it is, as I said earlier, it keeps the focus on Ethan and his team to complete the mission to stop the entity. So the great thing about all these subplots being removed and all this fluff being removed is that it's a much more streamlined movie. And the best thing about it is you don't have to wait as long for the fantastic plane chase at the end of the movie. Say what you want about either cut of this movie, but the plane chase is fantastic. It's absolutely amazing, one of the greatest action scenes in history. They basically took the ending of Fallout, which was a big helicopter chase, Ethan trying to stop a bomb from going off, and they transferred it to this movie, which is Ethan Hunt trying to stop a bomb from going off, but instead of helicopters, it's a plane chase. Still mightily impressive. I mean, it's Tom Cruise doing all that for real, risking his neck, and it is absolutely spectacular. And another thing Pentex does, and I'm not going to reveal it here, is that he alters the ending slightly. Pentex kind of makes the ending of this cut slightly ambiguous as to whether Ethan Hunt survived or not. So anyway, if you're a big Mission Impossible fan and you're disappointed with the Final Reckoning, do check this cut out. This is now my preferred cut of Final Reckoning. When you watch this version of the movie directly after Dead Reckoning Part 1, it's a much more enjoyable experience. Now, this version of the movie is available on Pentex's site. He does ask that you already own a physical or digital copy of the theatrical cut, just to support the filmmakers. So anyway, did you enjoy Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning? Do you think this cut is inferior to the theatrical cut? Maybe you thought the theatrical cut was fine. Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Share this video out there, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.